I was just cleaning the bedroom, fluffing pillows, folding laundry, doing the kind of mindless routine that usually brings me a little peace. Ryan's phone was on the nightstand, screen down like always, but suddenly it lit up with a brightness that pulled my eyes toward it. I swear I didn't mean to look, but the preview popped up so clearly it felt like it was calling my name. I can't stop thinking about last night. Send more. My heart didn't just drop. It slammed hard inside my chest, like someone had ripped open the floor beneath me. My hands started trembling before I even realized I had picked up his phone. I kept telling myself there had to be some explanation, some misunderstanding. But with every swipe, the truth got uglier. Dozens of messages. Explicit. Shameless. Words he used to say to me. The old me, the version of me that still believed we were okay. I could actually feel the warmth drain from my body as I scrolled. It was like my marriage was unraveling right there in my hands, and I couldn't stop it, couldn't breathe through it, couldn't make any sense of when everything had fallen apart. Then I heard the front door open, and my whole soul just tightened. Ryan walked in like he was stepping into any ordinary afternoon, humming, dropping his keys, completely unaware that I had already seen everything. When I turned toward him, the phone was shaking in my hand. Ryan, who is this woman? My voice cracked in ways I didn't even know were possible, and instead of guilt or fear or even a tiny spark of remorse, he gave me annoyance, pure dismissive irritation. You read my messages? He snapped, and in that moment, I felt something inside me fracture so sharply, it changed the way I would look at him forever. I remember staring at him, waiting for some kind of explanation, something human, something that showed the man I thought I married was still in there. But he didn't even flinch. Ryan, she's sending you things. You wrote things. What is this? I asked, my voice shaking so much it barely sounded like mine. He just shrugged, like we were talking about forgetting to buy milk. It's what happens when your wife doesn't give you attention, he said, cold, flat, as if the words didn't slice straight through me. That's the moment I felt my knees weaken, not from fear, but from the sheer cruelty of hearing him blame me for his betrayal. I tried to speak, tried to defend myself, tried to make him see the truth. How can you say that? I've been trying. But he cut me off before I could finish, waving his hand like I was an inconvenience. Trying? He scoffed. Please. Just accept it. It's your fault. And there it was, the final twist of the knife. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He genuinely believed he could break our marriage and make me carry the weight of it. In that moment, something inside me felt like glass cracking under pressure, a soundless shatter that no one else could hear. I didn't cry right away. I couldn't. My body felt frozen, like time had paused just long enough for me to feel every fragment of my world collapsing. The room looked the same bed, same walls, same framed photo of us smiling on our anniversary. But it all felt wrong now, like I was standing in the ruins of a life I didn't realize had already fallen apart. Ryan walked past me like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just watched my marriage die in his own words. And while I stood there gripping his phone, I realized I had no idea who I was married to anymore, or what the next moments of my life were about to become. When the shock finally loosened its grip, the tears came. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet stream that I couldn't stop, like my body was grieving before my mind could catch up. I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the phone as if letting it go would make everything real. It's strange how betrayal feels physical. My chest ached, my stomach tightened, my hands felt cold. And all I could think was, how long? How long has he been doing this while I was trying so hard to keep us together? Every late night, every distant answer, every sudden change in attitude started replaying with a cruel new clarity. I heard him moving around the house, drawers opening, closet doors sliding, the sound of him living his life like nothing had just shattered mine. And that hurt almost as much as the messages. It was the indifference, the complete lack of hesitation. The way he carried himself as if my pain was nothing but background noise. I wiped my face, trying to steady my breathing, trying to find one solid thought to hold on to. But all I found was an emptiness so deep it scared me. I felt abandoned while the person who abandoned me was still inside the same house. When he finally walked back into the room, I couldn't look at him the same way. Something had changed, not just in him, but in me. The woman who spent years forgiving, smoothing, compromising. She felt distant now, fading like a photo left in the sun too long. I didn't know who I was going to become after that moment, but I knew I couldn't go back to who I was before. As he brushed past me again, completely unfazed, I felt something shift inside me. Not strength, not yet, but the faintest spark of awareness. The kind that whispers that the story isn't finished, and whatever comes next will not be what he expects. In the days that followed, I kept hoping Ryan would wake up one morning and realize what he'd done. Not just the cheating, but the cruelty that came with it. But he didn't. Instead, he stopped pretending altogether. He'd come home late, smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, wearing that smug, satisfied look that made my stomach twist. I could hear his phone buzzing openly now, no effort to hide it. Sometimes he'd answer right in front of me, lowering his voice just enough to make sure I knew the call wasn't for business. It was like he enjoyed watching me crumble. Every evening felt like a new kind of humiliation. He'd change clothes quickly, sometimes humming, sometimes whistling, then head toward the door without so much as a glance in my direction. I'd ask simple things, desperate things, anything to understand why he was doing this. "Ryan, can we talk?" "Ryan, what's happening to us?" He'd roll his eyes, adjust his belt, and walk out like I didn't exist. And each time the door shut behind him, the house seemed to exhale a kind of loneliness that pressed in from all sides. It's strange. You can feel completely abandoned even when you're still married. One night, I gathered every ounce of courage I had left and asked, "Where are you going?" It was such a small question, barely above a whisper, but it carried all my fear, my heartbreak, my last hope that he might hear me. He looked at me with a cruel little smile that I'd never seen before, cold, sharp, almost triumphant. "Out," he said, "with someone who actually wants me." The words hit so hard I felt my throat tighten. "Ryan, please, can we talk? You're hurting me." He paused just long enough to twist the knife deeper. "Good. Maybe you'll learn to be a better wife in your next marriage." And then he slammed the door, leaving me in a silence so heavy it felt like the walls were closing in. After that night, something inside me cracked in a way I could actually feel, like a thin line spreading across glass. I cried in the dark, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep, where words don't exist anymore. Every time I heard his car pull into the driveway, my heart would jolt between fear and hope, only for both to die the moment he walked in. He'd toss his jacket on the couch, smelling like a stranger, and move around the house with this awful confidence, as if nothing I felt mattered. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was cruelty. Intentional, cold-blooded cruelty. I kept asking myself what I had done to deserve this, replaying every argument, every moment of distance, searching for some failure I could claim as mine. That's what women my age have been trained to do. Carry the blame, smooth the edges, fix what others break. But with every passing day, something in me started shifting. The more he tried to crush me, the more a strange, quiet strength began forming in the cracks. I didn't recognize it at first. It felt foreign, like standing up after a fall and realizing you're not as fragile as you thought. Pain changes you, sometimes in ways the person causing it never sees coming. And while Ryan strutted around like a man who believed he had total control, he had no idea what was happening inside me. He didn't see the way my eyes stopped begging. He didn't notice how my voice stopped shaking. He didn't realize I had started paying attention to his words, his habits, the lies he accidentally revealed in his arrogance. He believed he was breaking me, but he was actually stripping away the last of my illusions. And beneath those illusions, there was a version of me he didn't know, a version he had underestimated for far too long, a version that wasn't done fighting, just quietly waiting. The night he slammed the door on me, something shifted in a way I didn't fully understand at first. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, listening to the echo of his words repeating in my head like a punishment I didn't deserve. But somewhere in all that pain, a strange clarity began to rise. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet and steady, like a whisper I had ignored for too long. I realized I couldn't keep begging someone who enjoyed watching me suffer. I couldn't keep trying to save a marriage he had already set on fire. And for the first time in months, I asked myself a simple question. What about me? As I wiped my face, I felt a different kind of emotion pushing through the heartbreak. Not rage, not yet, but awareness. Awareness of everything I had given, everything I had forgiven, everything I had endured in silence while he chipped away at my self-worth. I remembered the late nights he blamed on work, the sudden secrets, the coldness that crept into our home long before I realized it meant someone else was already in his life. I had been trying so hard to hold our world together, while he had been tearing it apart piece by piece. And now, standing in the ruins he created, something inside me began to harden. He thought he was winning. He thought breaking me would keep me small, quiet, obedient. But he had forgotten one thing. I knew him better than anyone. I knew how careless he could be, how arrogant, how sloppy with the things he thought he had under control. He didn't realize that while he was busy flaunting his affairs, I had been collecting something else, the truth. The kind of truth that could destroy not just our marriage, but every lie he built his life on. So while he was out chasing attention, I sat there in the dim light of our living room, my heart still hurting, my hands still shaking, and I made a silent promise. If he wanted to break me, he should have made sure I stayed down. The next morning, when the sun barely touched the curtains, I walked into the closet and reached for a small box I had hidden months ago. Funny how I'd almost forgotten it was there, tucked behind old sweaters and things I never used anymore. My hands hesitated for a moment before I pulled it down, like I already knew that opening it would change everything. Inside were the pieces of a truth Ryan never imagined I would hold. Falsified invoices, duplicate billing statements, emails, so many emails, and the audio recordings I'd saved the day he bragged on the phone about stealing from clients. Each document felt heavier than paper, like it carried the weight of every lie he'd ever told. I sat on the edge of the bed, the box open beside me, and stared at the evidence spread across my lap. I remembered the day I first discovered his little financial shortcuts. I had asked him about a strange payment once, innocent, gentle, trying to understand. He'd snapped at me, called it business you wouldn't understand, and made me feel stupid for even asking. Back then, I didn't push. I wanted peace. I wanted harmony. But that day, something inside me whispered that Ryan wasn't just careless. He was dangerous. And so, quietly, without fully knowing why, I began saving things. Proof. Receipts. Little pieces of a world he thought was hidden. I guess a part of me had been preparing for this moment long before I realized it. My fingers brushed over the documents, and an unexpected calm settled over me. Not the calm of forgiveness, but the calm of certainty. A clarity that came from finally seeing things for what they were. "You wanted a war, Ryan?" I whispered to myself, barely recognizing my own voice. "Fine. Let's end your kingdom." It didn't sound like revenge. It sounded like survival, like reclaiming the parts of me he tried to erase. And as I closed the box and set it beside me, the fear that had lived in my chest for months began to loosen its grip. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something close to power. A quiet, steady strength that told me the story was about to change. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table long before Ryan came home. No lights on, just the soft glow from a lamp in the corner and the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The box was right in front of me, closed but loud in its own way, like a secret waiting to be unleashed. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't crying. I felt strangely grounded, as if the weight of the truth I carried finally gave me something solid to stand on. Every sound from outside made my heart thump a little harder, not from fear, but from anticipation. I wasn't the same woman he'd left crying in the bedroom. Not anymore. When the door finally opened, I didn't move. I could hear him toss his keys, exhale dramatically, and walk toward the kitchen with the confidence of a man who believed he had total control. He didn't notice the tension in the air, or the way I sat perfectly still, or the box resting on the table like a loaded weapon. "What, waiting up for me? Cute," he said, smirking. I lifted my eyes to him slowly, and for the first time, he blinked like he wasn't sure what he was looking at. "You should be careful, Ryan," I said, my voice calm, almost peaceful. The kind of calm that makes people nervous, even if they don't know why. He laughed at first, the same dismissive laugh he always used to belittle me. "Why? Gonna cry again?" he asked. But something in my expression must have shifted, because the smile on his face began to falter. "No," I said, leaning back in my chair, allowing a small, deliberate smile to touch my lips. "But I wonder what the IRS would say about your little side projects." The color drained from his face so fast it was almost impressive. His mouth opened, but no words came out at first. And in that silence, that perfect, heavy silence, I realized that the power he had stolen from me was already finding its way back. Ryan finally found his voice, though it came out thin, shaky. Nothing like the man who'd spent weeks towering over me with cruelty. "What did you say?" he asked, his eyes narrowing, trying to read my expression. I stood up slowly, letting the chair slide back with a soft scrape against the floor. "You heard me," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything I could have shouted. His breathing changed, sharp, uneven, the first sign that the ground beneath him was starting to crack. And my God, it felt like justice, just to watch him finally feel something. He stepped closer, panic pushing through his arrogance. "Gina, don't mess with my business." That line, the warning, the command, the entitlement, once upon a time, it would have scared me. It would have made me shrink, apologize, retreat into myself to keep the peace. But now? His fear only sharpened my clarity. "You should have thought about that," I said, "before destroying your marriage." His jaw tightened, his eyes darting around like he was searching for a version of me he still knew how to manipulate. But she wasn't there anymore. He couldn't see it yet, but I had already stepped out of the role he assigned me. For a brief second, we just stood there. Him frozen, me unwavering, like two people who suddenly realized they weren't playing the same game anymore. And even though my heart was still bruised, still raw from everything he'd put me through, I felt something new rising in its place. Strength, certainty, a quiet fire. I didn't have to scream or cry to reclaim my power. All I had to do was stand up and speak the truth he never thought I'd dare to use. Without another word, I walked past him, leaving him speechless in the middle of the kitchen, holding nothing but the fear of what was coming next. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally starting to become myself again. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calm sitting in my chest, the kind that comes when you finally stop surviving and start acting. I got dressed slowly, choosing clothes that made me feel grounded, steady. Then I picked up the box of evidence, set it on the passenger seat, and drove to an attorney's office I had looked up at 3 a.m. My hands were steady on the wheel, steadier than they'd been in months. It felt like walking toward a new version of my life, one I hadn't met yet, but had been waiting for all along. When I sat across from the attorney, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority without effort, I felt a knot form in my throat. Not from fear, from relief. I opened the box and placed everything on her desk, document by document. She took her time examining each piece, the silence thick with the weight of what she was uncovering. Finally, she looked up at me, her expression shifting into something between astonishment and respect. "This evidence is overwhelming," she said. "He could face serious jail time." Hearing those words didn't feel vengeful. It felt righteous. Like the universe was handing me back pieces of myself. "Good," I said, my voice steady. "I want to press charges." She nodded, already pulling out forms, already outlining the steps we would take. "We'll also ensure you get everything you're entitled to in the divorce," she added. I didn't flinch at the word divorce. That version of us had died long before I found those messages. "I want my life back," I told her, "and I want him to lose his." As the pen met the first page of paperwork, I felt something inside me settle into place. A decision made not in rage, but in clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone to love you and decide instead to save yourself. The days that followed moved faster than I expected. Once the attorney filed the paperwork, it was like a domino line finally collapsing, every piece of Ryan's carefully crafted image falling apart right on schedule. By midweek, the IRS had officially opened an investigation. I got the confirmation email while I was drinking coffee at the kitchen table, and for a moment I just stared at the screen, letting the words sink in. "Your report has been received and is under active review." It felt surreal, like watching the beginning of a storm I had once been terrified of. Only now I was the one holding the thunder. And it didn't stop there. Clients started calling his office, furious and demanding answers. Complaints were filed. Accounts were frozen. The attorney updated me every morning, her voice calm, measured, almost satisfied. "His business license is under emergency suspension," she said one afternoon. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, letting the weight of those words settle into my bones. Not because I enjoyed his suffering, but because every consequence was a reminder that I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the broken woman he tried to reduce me to. I had found my way back to myself through the very truth he thought I would never use. When Ryan finally stormed into the house, it was like watching a man I didn't even recognize. His face was red, twisted with panic, sweat beading on his forehead. He slammed the door so hard the walls trembled. "What did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking. For the first time, I looked at him without fear. "You destroyed your life," I said quietly. "I only showed people the truth." He staggered back like the words physically hit him. "I'll lose everything," he shouted, his voice breaking apart. I stood up, walked past him, and opened a window to let in fresh air. "Just like how you tried to destroy me," I said, "enjoy the consequences." And I meant every word. After he finished shouting, Ryan just stood there, chest heaving, eyes wide like a cornered animal who suddenly realized the cage he built for others had finally snapped shut around him. I watched him pace, back and forth, mumbling to himself, pulling at his hair, checking his phone as if someone, anyone, could rescue him from the consequences he had earned. It was almost eerie how small he looked. This was the same man who weeks earlier walked around the house like he was untouchable, like my pain meant nothing. Now he couldn't even look at me without his voice cracking. And for the first time, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt distance. I felt clarity. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, taking slow sips while he spiraled in the living room. It was strange. The house felt lighter. The air didn't weigh on my lungs the same way it had for months. Maybe power does that. Maybe truth does. Or maybe it was simply the realization that I didn't owe him my silence, my dignity, or my life anymore. He followed me into the kitchen, desperation dripping from every step. "Gina, please," he said, voice trembling. "You can fix this." I turned to him and really looked at him, the fear in his eyes, the panic settling into his bones, the cracks in his confidence widening. He wanted me to save him from a fire he started with his own hands. I placed the empty glass in the sink and let the water run for a moment, listening to the steady sound before turning back to him. "Fix it?" I repeated softly. "Ryan, I'm done fixing things you break." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "You did this," I said. "Not me. You built your life on lies, and now you're finally standing in the wreckage." He took a step toward me, but I stepped back, not out of fear, out of finality. He reached for my arm, but I moved away before he could touch me. For years, I let him pull me in. Not anymore. Without another word, I walked past him and up the stairs, letting him sit alone with the truth he never believed I'd have the strength to use. And as I reached the top step, I felt the shift. Something ending, and something much bigger beginning. The fallout hit faster than even I expected. Within days, Ryan's business, the empire he bragged about, the empire he used to justify every late night, every secret, every lie, began to crumble like it was made of sand. I watched it happen from a distance, the way someone watches a storm approach through a window, quietly, steadily, without looking away. Clients walked out. Partners cut ties. His name started circulating around town for all the wrong reasons. And everywhere he turned, doors that once opened easily slammed shut in his face. For years, he acted like he was untouchable. Now the world was touching him exactly where it hurt. I heard him on the phone one morning, pacing the living room, trying to force his voice into that confident tone he used to use when he thought he controlled everything. But the cracks were obvious. "I just need time," he said. "It's all a misunderstanding." His voice wavered on the last word. A misunderstanding. As if the fraud, the lies, the stolen money, the manipulation could be brushed away with the right sentence. Then came the moment I knew would break him. The phone slipped from his hand, hit the floor, and he just stared at it. His partner had asked him not to contact the team anymore. He was officially out. And just like that, the man who once walked with his chest high looked like he had forgotten how to stand. The headlines didn't take long to follow. Local businessman under federal investigation. The words glowed from his laptop screen as he sat there, pale and trembling, scrolling through the article like he was searching for a version that didn't exist. His mistress, the one he once said wanted him, disappeared the moment the story spread. No calls, no messages, nothing. She evaporated like smoke, and for the first time since everything started, I felt something I didn't expect. Not pity, but recognition. This was the cost of the life he chose. This was the aftermath of his decisions. And now, standing in the ruins he built with his own hands, Ryan had nowhere left to go but down. The day he finally broke, I felt it before I even saw him. The house had this heavy, defeated stillness, like even the walls were tired of him. I walked downstairs and found him sitting at the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together like he was praying to a god he hadn't spoken to in decades. When he lifted his head, his eyes were swollen and red, but not from remorse, from fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. And for a moment, I wondered if he even understood everything he had done, or if he was only terrified because the consequences had finally caught up to him. "Gina, please, help me," he said, his voice shaky, barely holding itself together. Hearing him say my name like that, soft, desperate, stripped of superiority, stirred something inside me, but it wasn't compassion. It was clarity. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't apologizing. He just wanted me to save him, to patch up the holes, to carry the weight, to rebuild what he had burned. "You can fix this," he whispered, like I was still the woman who used to smooth over his messes to keep the peace. But that woman was gone. She left the moment he tried to make her believe she wasn't enough. I sat across from him, keeping my voice calm, steady. "Just like how I could have fixed your cheating?" I asked. His face tightened, shame and denial wrestling behind his eyes. "I made mistakes," he said. And that word, mistakes, nearly made me laugh. "No," I replied, leaning back. "Mistakes are accidents. You made decisions." Every syllable landed between us like a truth he could no longer dodge. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time he looked small, not because he lost his business, but because he had finally run out of excuses. He looked at me with a kind of pleading I couldn't recognize, like he still believed there was a version of me willing to save him. But he had no idea how much he had already lost. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the divorce papers I'd been keeping there for days, waiting for the right moment. Ryan's eyes followed the movement, confusion flickering into dread as he realized exactly what I was holding. I placed the papers gently on the coffee table, almost tenderly, the way you set down something fragile, something final. "Gina, please," he whispered again, but the desperation didn't move me anymore. It washed over me like a breeze passing through an open window, felt, but powerless. "I need you," he said. "And I needed a husband," I answered. All I got was a fraud. His face crumpled, his shoulders collapsing inward as if the truth itself were too heavy for him to hold. He stared at the papers like signing them would erase the identity he had built for years, the successful businessman, the charming husband, the man who always got away with everything. But deep down, he knew it was already gone. I slid a pen across the table toward him. "Sign this," I told him, my voice calm and unwavering. "Then leave. You have nothing else to take from me." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The finality in my tone did what shouting never could. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. For a moment, he looked up at me, as if searching for the woman who once forgave everything. But she wasn't there. He lowered his eyes and scribbled his name, the ink cutting across the page like the last breath of a dying lie. I didn't watch him as he gathered his things. I didn't follow him to the door. I didn't need to see him walk away to feel the freedom settling into my chest. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, the silence didn't hurt. It felt clean. It felt new. It felt like the beginning of a life I was finally ready to claim. 6 months later, I barely recognized the woman I used to be. And that's the best part. I'm sitting at a small cafe with Melissa, sunlight warming my shoulders, the smell of fresh pastries drifting through the air. She looks at me with that wide, knowing smile only a true friend can give. You look incredible, she says, reaching for my hand. I'm proud of you. And for the first time in a long time, I don't shrink under the compliment. I don't question it. I smile back, genuinely, because I finally feel aligned with the version of myself she sees. Life feels softer now, lighter, kinder. My new apartment is small, but filled with things that make me feel grounded. Warm lamps, soft blankets, colors I chose just for me. I started studying interior design, something I always wanted but never allowed myself to pursue. And then there's my dog, a clumsy, affectionate rescue who follows me around like I'm the entire world. With him, the house never feels empty. I've reconnected with my family too, people who had been watching me disappear for years without knowing how to pull me back. Now, every phone call, every visit feels like stitching myself back together. Sometimes I catch myself laughing at the simplest things. A new plant, a recipe that actually turns out right, a quiet Sunday morning. It's strange how healing works. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in little moments that sneak up on you, reminding you that you survived something that once felt impossible. And little by little, I've learned to love my life again, to love myself again. Sitting there with Melissa, hearing her talk about weekend plans and new beginnings, I realized something important. Peace isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you choose and protect.